I was on
Okay, I think we're ready to start. All right, let's start, everybody. Good evening, everybody.
You wanted to make a lot of crowd noise.
Make a lot of crowd noise, a lot of applause. We really, we had a busy day today. We have a busy dinner, we played bridge today, we played canasta. And now it's time for a lecture about Weird Florida. So I'm excited to have Eliot Kleinberg. And he was actually, he did a presentation for us via Zoom over the summer. He mentioned it was right before I got married. So you remember, and please let me know afterwards. He's got some books. He's got a lot of books that he has written. And anybody on Zoom, if you want to have a copy, just let me know and I will reserve one for you. Okay, so without further ado, I want to, and I'll have Eliot talk about himself because there's so much to say about him, but everybody that's put together. A warm welcome for Eliot.
Hello, everybody. I always feel funny calling what I do a lecture when I'm talking about, you know, pedophilia and strange crimes and things like that. It's always nice to be here. I did a talk this morning on Weird Florida in, I think, West Palm Beach. I don't remember. And this is, believe it or not, people still want me to come and talk about Weird Florida. The book came out 25 years ago. Next year marks 25 years of Weird Florida, the book that started it all. You've heard of Florida Man web pages. You've heard of all these crazy Florida. This was first. So we're very proud of that. And so I'm glad to be here talking to you about Weird Florida. Now, before I talk about Weird Florida, I want to talk about the weather. How many of you in the last couple of days have called your friends and family up north to rub it in? Yeah. Now, normally we wait till February, right? You know, February is Florida Rub It In month, or if you live up north, February is I Hate Florida month. But now it's like November. I think the Dolphins are playing Sunday night in Buffalo, and they're calling for, and I love this because I grew up in Florida, so this meant nothing to me until I got stuck in one. And it sounds so romantic. Wintry mix. You guys, who remembers wintry mix? You miss it? No. Okay. So we love Florida. Florida is weird. Everybody knows Florida is weird. But the funny part about it is that people who live in Florida, they're like, oh, you know, it's no big deal. So before I start, I asked some people to help me out at the beginning of the show. So who's got envelope number one? Number one. And
I do.
you do. Okay, I gotta hold the mic because we're on Zoom, so I gotta hold the mic here.
Okay. Near Tampa, a driver in a fit of road rage fired a shot at a passing SUV, not realizing it was a marked sheriff's patrol vehicle.
Okay, who's got number two? All right, here we go. Hold on. Go ahead, sir.
A judge ordered a Miami area woman to go to prison and pay restitution after prosecutors said she had convinced the family that it was the subject of a curse and would be harmed unless it gave her large sums of cash for her to perform rituals over. Instead, prosecutors said she spent it on vehicles, property, and casino gambling. They said over 4 years, she took the family for $3 million.
Wow. Okay. And finally, number three, not for family listening. Go ahead.
In Clearwater, a man fleeing authorities knocked over a nativity display and several spotted plants, then destroyed a mailbox and tried to steal a car. all after he was caught having marital relations with a dog.
So, okay, we got the stupid SUV guy. We got the $3 million curse, and we've got Mr. Nativity. All of that happened last week. Last week. And that's the thing, here in Florida, we don't even blink an eye. So for example, everybody remember this? Guy threw the alligator, baby alligator through the drive-through window of a Wendy's in Lake Worth. Remember? Okay. People in Ohio are like, oh my God, like where'd he get the alligator and how'd he throw it in through the window? People in Florida are like, oh, I hope the alligator's okay. Here's a book, 1998, 25 years. This guy's interesting. This guy was a Port St. Lucie police officer. He was very upset that I put this on the cover of the book. And then afterwards, he wanted me to write his autobiography. So we'll figure it out. When you talk about word Florida, you want to start off with politics. It's so darn easy. Not just politics, but celebrity in general. Florida is where people go to destroy their careers. So we start with this guy. His name's Mark Foley. He was a U.S. congressman from the Lake Worth area. I know him personally, very nice guy. He's had a remarkable recovery, reputation-wise, but this was pretty tough for him. He was caught sending racy texts to underage congressional pages from his desk on the floor of the House. Now, they were male pages, but really in today's enlightened society, we should point out that was really the problem was not their gender, but the fact that they were underage. So Mr. Foley had to resign. And this guy ran for his empty seat, Democrat Tim Mahoney. And Tim ran as a family guy. Family values. Family, love of family, values. Are you with me? You know where this is heading? Okay, that's his wife. I can tell you that my wife of 39 years, will be 40 in August, would not be here with me for a news conference such as this, where Tim, and you can kind of tell here, had just been sued by one of his mistresses. One. So I think a few more sued him right after that. So he lost the election. A little while later, I was on a family cruise and we stopped in Dubrovnik, Croatia.
Oh.
Beautiful city, lovely. And one of the things I love about Europe is that all over Europe, you have these open air plazas where you sit there in the sunshine and you have a glass of wine or a cup of espresso and you just talk and schmooze and have a piece of cheese and then the doves and it's beautiful. So I'm sitting there with my family and all of a sudden I look off to the side, there's a newspaper. Well, of course it's in Croatian, but I'm a newspaper guy. So, you know, I pick it up, I start reading it. So here it is, right? And I'm turning the pages, and I finally turn the page. There's Tim Mahoney. Tim Mahoney from Palm Beach County. There he is. Look, Tim Mahoney, right there. I saved the paper. It says, I looked it up. It says, Democrat pays mistress. In case you're wondering, the Croatian word for mistress is ljubavniku. Hope that you'll never need to use it. Jim Baker came to Florida to end his career. Remember him? The televangelist? Well, Jim Baker had a hypocrisy problem. That was his hypocrisy problem. Jessica Hahn, right? Yeah, that's a heck of a hypocrisy problem, especially if you ask Tammy Faye. Where did he consummate this hypocrisy problem? The Sheraton Sand Key Resort in Clearwater, specifically right there. Right there, Route 538. After this incident, people called up to make reservations at the hotel, and they all said, I want to stay in Route 538. So what did the manager do? Changed all of the numbers to 538. So Jim Baker was the last celebrity to come to Florida and ruin his life. No? No? How about this guy? Remember him? Gary Hart. And there's his wife too. Once again, I wish I could tell you how small the chances are that my wife would put up with any of this. Shouldn't have to worry, but still. So Gary Hart, those of you who are of my age, will remember that in 1984, he was the presumptive Democratic candidate. He was a hot star. He was on his way, Gary Hart. He's going places. He's going to be the next president of the United States. And then it all came crashing down. Because this was his hypocrisy problem. Her name is Donna Rice. And his hypocrisy problem surfaced in Key Biscayne down in Miami on a boat called, you cannot make this up. What was the name of the boat? Come on. Nobody remembers? The Monkey Business.
Right.
So, okay, now, this guy, at least he never came to Florida. Well, yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
For a while, he lived 3 blocks from my sister in Miami. One day, the cops raided his house. And I forget what they were looking for. Maybe they never said what they were looking for. If they were looking for evidence of murder or whatever, who knows. But what they did find was that he had an illegal satellite dish set up, which prompted comedian David Letterman to say, well, we all know the moral of this story. It's okay to murder your ex-wife, but don't mess with the satellite company. Michael Jackson, no Florida angle. Thank goodness. Yeah, there is. This chimpanzee retired to Sebring. Anybody know who this is? Little young for us. Vanilla Ice, the rapper. That's his pet wallaroo. In case you're wondering, it's a cross between a wallaby and a kangaroo. Don't you have one? No.
I'd like one.
He had left it, along with his friend, a goat, at the home of his wife's grandmother up in St. Lucie County while he shot a commercial in California. And the 2 guys broke out of their, wherever they were, and got loose. And it took them 2 days to find them. But the good news is the wallaby was safe. It also turned out that Vanilla Ice had allowed his exotic animal permit to expire, which you guys would never do, right? I keep mine up to date. So, everybody knows what that is? Yeah. Once a year, Palm Beach County Animal Control holds a exotic animal amnesty day, right? Who else holds an exotic animal amnesty day? All you people out there with exotic animals, bring them in, no questions asked. You know, we have people turn in more exotic animals than they turn in guns on gun amnesty day. So people have pythons. Why do they have pythons? Does anybody know how we ended up with all these pythons in the Everglades? Because like many of these exotic animals, you know the little lizards with the curly tails? They were from Cuba, and the iguanas were brought in, and the pythons were brought in, and there's some frogs that were brought in, and all of these animals which are destroying our ecosystem because they're not native to Florida, like the curly, if you look in your backyard, the little lizards, the ones with the straight tails, they're good lizards. They eat all the bugs. The Cuban curly tail lizards eat the good lizards, and then nobody eats the bugs. So thank you, Cuba. So somewhere along the line, people bought pythons and put them in an aquarium. And after a while, the python got too big for the aquarium, and then it got too big for the stove, and then it got too big for the garage. So they drive it out into the Everglades. They dump it in the Everglades because, after all, something will kill it. Well, there are now 100,000 pythons in the Everglades, and they lay eggs at about 20 of them at a pop. So thank you to whoever brought in the pythons. But at least some of them turned them in on Exotic Animal Day. Somebody also turned in one of these things. It's called a serval. It's a rare African cat, about 80 pounds. What is he doing with it? How did he get it? Turned it in. I'm sure it's at a zoo now. This lady became famous for 10 minutes because she claims, some of you might remember this, that she spotted in her grilled cheese sandwich
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see that today.
the Virgin Mary. I always thought it was credit card. But she said it was the Virgin Mary. What did she do? Did she fall to her knees and pray? No. She stuck the grilled cheese sandwich in her freezer for 10 years and waited for the right moment to do what?
Sell it.
Put it on eBay, where she sold it for $500.
Oh, is it?
$5,000. $7,000. Keep going, Eliot. $28,000. She sold it for $28,000. 10-year-old grilled cheese sandwich with the Virgin Mary or Gleneagles taking pick. This is the mayor of Inglis, Florida. I was just up there last week. It's up north of Tampa. It's just a little town. You see where it is. And about 15 years ago or so, this is a very religious mayor. She decided that she did not want Satan in her town.
Well, who does?
So, yeah, that's what I said. No, I don't want it. So she wrote up a proclamation ordering Satan to stay clear of the town of Inglis. By virtue of my position as mayor of Inglis, Florida, I hereby order you, Prince of Darkness, not to enter the town of Inglis. Now, I'm thinking that, Satan's down there, he's reading this. Oh, man, I'm cooked. I guess I better not go to the Inglis, they'll arrest me. There's devil. And she took these proclamations, put them on town stationery, and put one at each of the 4 entrances to the town. Oh, this is all very honorable and, okay. And it's harmless, except it's not harmless. Because the mayor of the town can't just go out and write up a proclamation and borrow some city stationery and print it out and go take somebody and put it on a sign. Towns have to pass these things. And she can't just issue a proclamation arbitrarily. So she got in all sorts of trouble. The Comedy Central sent a guy in the devil's outfit to stand in front of a convenience store. I wish it had been John Candy, it wasn't. To stand in front of a convenience store and beg somebody to run him out of town. I just watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles the other day. This is the best part of the story, is that he's not in a computer generated devil. He's like in a $10 party city devil outfit. But that's what they sent down to Inglis to get somebody to try to run him out of town. So, see this lady? She's coming off a plane because she's just been arrested. She's wearing this thing over her head because she doesn't want you to recognize her. But it's kind of silly because the next morning she's in court and everybody can see who she is. And besides, everyone already knew who she was. Yep, that's right. She was an astronaut who had driven all night from Houston to Orlando to beat up the wife of an astronaut with whom she was having an affair. That's what I call the right stuff. Right? And then there's this guy.
Oh.
Now, I'm hesitant to pick on him because he just had that terrible wreck and he's trying to, he's recovering, he's back to playing golf, which is great. But he had a problem. Yeah, he had a bit of a problem. He had that hypocrisy problem, I told you. So I'm going to show you what his problem was. And the great thing is, I don't even have to say anything. We're just going to look at his problem. You ready? Okay, there's Mrs.
Oh, we had a lot of
A few.
She had quite a few.
The problem is, I don't know.
New Jersey? Nope.
Nope, it happened in Florida.
Always. So now, around 2005, the editors who had done Weird Florida 1 said, hey, do we want to do a Weird Florida 2? I said, oh yeah, let's do it. And they said, well, has anything interesting happened in Florida between 1998 and 2005 that would go into a book titled Weird Florida? Well, I said, well, for starters, I remember this. Now, I was in the Broward County Court when this guy was doing this. He's a victim of it's that wonderful picture, but unfortunately it victimized him forever. He was a county magistrate who was just trying to do a good deed by looking at these chats. And what I say about the 2000 election is this. What made the election a fiasco was not the butterfly ballots or anything like that. It was the fact that the difference in the presidential race in Florida, which decided the presidential race in the country, was 500 votes. How many units are in this development? 1,100. Okay. In a state of 28 million, the difference in the vote was 500 votes. That's why it was so crazy. And that's nobody's fault. It just happened. Anybody here from Chicago area originally? Yeah, okay. Try to imagine if they'd had to do the vote recount in Chicago, where voting irregularities are an art form. They threw out more ballots in New Mexico than they threw out in Florida. Didn't matter, it wasn't a close race. They threw out more ballots in Chicago than they threw out in all of Florida. Didn't matter, it wasn't a close race, but it was a close race in Florida. So this part was not the fiasco. This was the part of people, really good-hearted people across the political spectrum, just trying to come up with a solution and figure out who the next president of the United States is going to be. And we'll never know who won. But after a while, didn't you get a little tired of hearing how stupid we were? Oh, those stupid Floridians. You can't even look at a ballot. Oh, those stupid Floridians. Well, most of the voting that was messed up was in places like this and Kings Point. So you know what? Does that mean that 2 years ago, all those dumb Floridians were dumb Long Islanders? No, they weren't dumb. It was just the way the ballot was set up, and it just happened. So you want to call us dumb Floridians, go right ahead. And then there was this. More creepy than funny. Pretty darn creepy. 14 of the 20 at some point were in Palm Beach County, including 3 at the Hamlet Apartments over there by the Target on Lincoln, which was right behind our news bureau. Of course, we didn't know it at the time. Yeah, that was really crazy. And just after that, before we even had a chance to catch our breath, we had this. Remember that one? Anthrax attacks the National Enquirer in Boca Raton. So the National Enquirer has a headline that says we were attacked by anthrax and they're telling the truth. Who'd have guessed it? National Enquirer for once told the truth. We all remember Eliot Gonzalez. That was a really sad story where there were no winners, because you could certainly understand the ardor of the Cuban Americans, because the idea of sending this guy back to Cuba was just so horrible that they couldn't imagine it. Don't send him back to Cuba. Castro will just turn him into a pawn. She ended up doing it. But other people said, look, Cuba's a terrible place, but the kid's father is there, and his father deserves his son. If the kid was from North Korea, it's an awful place, or Iran, we just send him back. We wouldn't have been happy about it, we just sent him back because that's where his father was. So they ended up having to kidnap him. So that was a tragedy all the way around. So a few years later, one of my reporter friends at Palm Beach Post, where I worked for 33.5 years, snuck into Cuba and did a bunch of stories. And she sent this home, and the family says, hey, you want to hear a good joke? It's 20 years in the future, and there's a guy standing on a street corner, and he's yelling, free Eliot, free Eliot, free Eliot. What are you talking about? Eliot came back to Cuba 20 years ago. He says, I know, I'm Eliot. The president of the Martin County chapter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Do I have to finish the sentence? You guys go ahead. Arrested for drunk driving. Okay. While she's at the jail, her friend who had been in the car with her calls the daughter of the president of the Martin County Mothers Against Drunk Driving and says, Nancy, your mom just got arrested for DUI. Can you come and get me, please? So Nancy goes over there, and yeah, she's driving drunk too. Not a good day for the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. This man was arrested in northern Broward County. He was going door to door through some neighborhoods, offering mammograms. Without benefit of a license or equipment. Now, I was at a Mensa convention. You guys know Mensa, right?
Yes.
It was down in Broward County, but it was a national convention. Actually, people from all over the world. And I was talking about we're Florida. And the guy raises his hand. He goes, I'm from Southern California. And pound for pound, mile for mile, block for block, we're weirder than South, we're weirder than Florida. I said, oh yeah, we're on, right? He challenged me, yeah, we're on. I said, go ahead. He says, in Southern California, our strippers have to have a college degree. I said, please. There was a strip joint in Orlando that they were going to shut down unless they could prove that they were a performing arts center. So the strippers did, Macbeth. The good part about crazy and weird Florida is that it's all been relatively recent, right? Is there any chance that anything stupid or crazy happened in Florida's history as opposed to currently? No, there's no chance, right? You're way ahead of me. This is our state seal. It's quite pretty, don't you think? Yeah, you got the Seminole, she's dropping orange blossoms. That's a side wheeler from North Florida. That's the proper palm trees, very pretty. This seal was approved in 1985 after the Secretary of State realized that they'd been using the seal for 80 years that nobody had really looked at closely. Here's the seal that was around for 80 years before they finally changed it. Anybody have a problem with it? Well, this is the North, it's a Plains Indian, and those are the wrong seeds, and that's the wrong kind of ship. But other than that, it's okay, right? What? What'd you say? Oh, the mountains. Yeah, the mountains in Florida. Turns out that back in the 1870s or whatever, they had hired a guy from North Dakota to create the seal, and he just copied the North Dakota seal. And nobody noticed for 80 years. People say to me, who is the king of Weird Florida? It is not even close. He was the king of the first Weird Florida book, and 25 years later, he still is the king of Weird Florida. His name is Count Karl Kanzler von Kossel. He claimed to be royalty from Switzerland or Australia or someplace like that. But at the time, this is in the 30s, he was working as an X-ray technician at a hospital in Key West. And there he met and fell in love with a woman half his age, Elena Milagro Hoya. Even as he fell in love with her, he knew that their love was doomed because the X-rays that he himself had taken showed that she had tuberculosis, which in the 30s was fatal. So she died, and he was heartbroken. And he waited about a year, and he dug her up. Dug her up. And put her back together with piano wire and beeswax, and made her his girlfriend. Oh, he's right. And he got away with it for quite a while before the rumors started flying through town, and her family caught him and seized her body, and he went to jail for grave robbing, and he ended up moving up north somewhere and vanishing, and they found him dead years later. But at first, everybody thought, oh, how romantic, until they found out that this was a physical relationship as well. But it did spark 2 books and a musical called Undying Love, which I'm going to go down to Key West and see it sometime. Now, if you ever get to Fort Myers, there's a state park there called the Koreshan. The good news is they suffered almost no damage in Ian, although the Estero River came 10 feet up its banks and left debris all over the park. Took 3 days to clean it up, but the good part is the park's okay. The Koreshan was a compound that was around in the 1890s, early 1900s, run by a guy named David Koresh from upstate New York, who had a vision of an angel, who told him to come down to Southwest Florida, which back then there was nobody, and create a new Jerusalem of 10 million people. David Koresh believed we live not on the surface of the earth, but inside the shell. And when we're looking at what we think is the stars, it's actually the core. He went out on the beach with a sextant and tried to show how this was correct, whatever. Now, that may have been pretty weird, but his group also believed in civil rights, women's rights. So in some ways, they were very progressive. But there's one thing they believed in that was a bad idea: celibacy. It's hard to keep a group going when you believe in celibacy. So the group died out, and that was the end of the Koreshans. This is Jim Morrison at the Doors. Guys are my age, you know about the Doors, right? He's from Florida. Are you surprised? He was a military brat. His dad was at Patrick Air Force Base, up by where the Space Center is now. And the Doors were playing at an arena called Dinner Key Auditorium. Anybody lived in Miami for Dinner Key, right?
Girl from Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So you know Dinner Key. It's a horrible auditorium.
Well,
It's a big, dark box. But in the 1960s, that's where you went to see a rock concert. So around 1967, the Doors did a concert, where Jim Morrison allegedly exposed himself. And he was charged with, what a wonderful word, lascivious. I love that word. He was charged with lewd and lascivious behavior. So at the time, my dad was the editor of the African paper in Miami, the Old Miami News. And I said, Dad, he did this in front of 4,000 people. How can there be any alleged to it? Either he did it or he did it, 4,000 witnesses. He says, well, it's a very dark place and everybody in the room is stoned. So he was convicted in absentia, but he never served his time because he, you guys remember? Drowned in a bathtub in Paris. But the incident outraged this person. Remember her?
Yeah.
Anita Bryant. Anybody sing the jingle?
yeah.
Come to the Florida Sunshine Tree, right? Okay. Well, Anita Bryant was the spokesperson for Florida Oranges. She was very religious, which is her right. She was very big on anti-gay, tried to get an anti-gay ordinance passed in Dade County in the late 70s. But even before that, following this Jim Morrison incident, she was so outraged that she decided that she was going to have a rally for decency. And she was going to fill the Orange Bowl with 80,000 people standing up and cheering for decency. Well, you need a few local celebrities, so the first person she thought of was this guy, Jackie Gleason. Because after all, when you think of decency, you think of Jackie Gleason. Martin Luther King's birthday is coming up, right? And every year, a lot of groups like to have a Martin Luther King Day. They like to do an event. And they talk about Martin Luther King, I have a dream, keep the dream alive. And a town in Broward County called Lauderdale, near Fort Lauderdale, invited this guy, James Earl Jones, right? Darth Vader, Field of Dreams, Deep Boys, Lion King, who gave a lovely speech. And at the end of the speech, he was given a little, plaque or a poster or something, thanking him. And it said, thank you, James Earl Jones, for keeping the dream alive. But they made a mistake. It did not say, thank you, James Earl Kleinberg. It did not say, thank you, James Earl Trump. It did not say, thank you, James Earl Obama. No, it said, thank you, James Earl Ray. Who out of the billions of people on the planet is the one person who did the most to not keep the dream alive, because he's the guy that what? He's the guy that killed Martin Luther King. So if you're gonna make a mistake, that's a beauty. You think I'm making it up? There it is. Keeping the dream alive. So, Florida is a funny place. Florida is a crazy place. And people say, oh, you're picking on Florida. You're making fun of Florida. I said, well, it's more like I'm laughing with Florida. Certainly, in my 40-something years as a reporter, I wouldn't have gotten where I did if it wasn't for all the wild things that happened in Florida. I remember every time the national reporters would come down, and I'd walk up to them and introduce myself and say, hi, welcome to Florida, where nothing happens. We'd have interns come down from Ohio or Pennsylvania, Indiana. And I'd say, listen, when you're done with your internship, go back to your school and talk to your colleagues who did their internships in Des Moines or Portland, Oregon, or Charlotte, and ask them what they covered. They probably covered a sewer project. You covered a guy throwing an alligator through the window. So I celebrate Florida. And Florida's craziness, yeah, I get a little tired of everybody thinking that we're all crazy, but that's okay. But it's one of the things I like about Florida. And there are a lot of things I like about Florida. Frankly, I love Florida. Not the way the Chamber of Commerce does, it's something to be exploited, but more like a member of the family that you love, you try to make it better, you put up with it. And I'd like to think that I would feel that way even if I wasn't born here. But Florida's got problems. They do. They have big problems. We're paradise, don't get me wrong. You know, I'll be thinking it when I'm watching the Dolphins game Sunday night and it's sleeting in Buffalo. So we live in paradise. By the way, that's Homosassa Springs. If you ever get a chance to go up there, the water is like glass, very beautiful. So I love Florida, and Florida's got a lot of problems. And those problems would be hard enough to fix if everybody who lived in Florida considered themselves a Floridian and cared about what happened to Florida. But we have a problem. Our problem is that everybody in Florida is from somewhere else. That's not the problem. That's okay. The problem is a lot of them, if you ask them, oh no, I'm not a Floridian. I'm a New Yorker retired to Florida. I'm a Philadelphian in Florida. I'm a Clevelander in Florida. How long have you been here? 27 years. Anybody here from New York? Okay. My wife worked for a big bank, and one of her clients had a daughter who lived in San Francisco. And the daughter and her husband happened to be in town. And by coincidence, the San Francisco Giants were playing the Marlins. So Deb said, come with me, you'll be my arm candy. We'll take them out to dinner at Versailles, nice food, the restaurant in Miami, and we'll sit in the bank seats at the Marlins game. I'm like, oh yeah. So I'm at the game, and I'm looking around. People are cheering for the Giants. I couldn't figure this out. I'm like, it's not like all these people came from California. And then the light went on. They were not rooting for the San Francisco baseball Giants. For whom were they rooting?
New York Giants.
So these were people who left New York 40 years ago. And they're rooting for a team that left New York for California 65 years ago. But they would drink battery acid before they would root for the Marlins. And then they call the radio show and they say, you South Florida sports fans don't support the Marlins. Why, when the Yankees were in town, we filled half the stadium. And I says, sir, how long you lived in Florida? And I says, 18 years. So the talk show host says, sir, who in your mind constitutes a South Florida sports fan? You talking about people that grew up here? That's 9 people. So Mr. Yankee, when you complain about all the South Florida sports fans that aren't supporting the Marlins, that's you. Because you're at home watching the Yankees on cable, which you're allowed. You can root for whoever you want, but you then cannot complain that nobody supports the home team. And my argument is that that's not just about sports. Like I said, Florida's got a lot of problems. And I know people that watch the New York City Council streaming. They've lived in Florida for 20 years. I know people that still give money to candidates for Senate or Congress in New Jersey. But they can't tell you one person on the county commission. Well, how can I put this politely? You don't live there anymore. They don't care about you. But that new park that they're building on the other side of Linton Boulevard, that's the Palm Beach County Commission that's building the park that you're going to go to. And they're the ones you have to pay attention to in case you want to tell them how you want the park built or how much money you want to spend on it. And you can't do that if you're sitting at home watching the New York City Council. I will take you to my Publix and book, and more people buy the New York Post and the Palm Beach Post. You want to challenge me on that? No. So you can be nostalgic for wherever you came from. I'm nostalgic for Miami. But, and you can root for the old team. I don't have to like it, but okay. But you have to care about Florida, whether you've been here 10 minutes or 100 years. Because Florida is 30% native, 30%. And the analogy I use is a big circle. And it would be great if everybody was in the circle. I would settle for people having 1 foot in the circle. But what we cannot have is 30% in the circle and the other 70% outside the circle saying, you guys in the circle, you work out all the problems. Let us know how it turns out. We'll be on the golf course. Can't do that. It won't work. So a very wise man named Marx, I can never remember whether it was Carl or Groucho, once said it's better to light a candle than to burst the dark. So I can berate people into caring about Florida, or I can teach them about Florida and its history and its craziness in hopes that they'll feel more like it's their home. So that was another one of the reasons why I did Weird Florida. Now, right after Weird Florida came out in 1998, a very interesting thing happened. It was literally within a week. Up in northern Palm Beach County, which at the time was still kind of rural, a cow and her calf broke out of a pasture, walked 2 miles to the Intercoastal Waterway, and fell in. And the next day, there was a picture on the front page of the Palm Beach Post of sheriff's deputies lassoing a cow in the water and bringing it up like a tarpon. You think I'm kidding? There it is. The phones started ringing off the hook. You would think it would be people saying, oh my God, there are cows in the Intercoastal Waterway. No. Guy called me up, I couldn't call myself. He said, your caption, whoops. I didn't think I'd get the use of that. Guy called me up and he said, I figured they'd say, oh my God, there's cows in the water. He said, your caption called that an Angus, that's a drum. A few days later, I had the privilege of hearing my name intoned by this guy. Remember him? Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey. Good day. I'm driving down the street. Paul Harvey's on the radio. He says, Eliot Kleinberg, a reporter for the Palm Beach Post, has written a book called Weird Florida. It is a cry for help. I'm staring at the radio and I'm like, no, Paul, no. I'm having fun with Florida. I love Florida. It's no. Then I started thinking, Florida's got 22 million people. So if one person reads my book and decides not to move to Florida, the humiliation is worth it. So I've covered a lot of material. I've probably offended all of you at some point. My friend Hobson will let you know that my books are available for purchase and I will sign them afterwards. And I hope that I've made you appreciate that Florida is fun and Florida is paradise and it's a wonderful place to live, but you've got to care about it. You can't act like you're on a permanent vacation or else nothing will get fixed. I swear I'm not running for anything. So I think I've left some time for questions or comments. Anybody? Yes, ma'am, in the back. Wait, let me walk over with the mic. I don't want to knock over the camera. Yes, ma'am.
What's your feeling about DeSantis?
What's my feeling about DeSantis? Boy, you went right to it, didn't you? Okay. I was a journalist for 40 years, including 33 and a half years at the Palm Beach Post. I still get called upon every once in a while to help out the Post. So technically, I'm still kind of a journalist, even though I'm retired. And because of that, I still refuse to give you my opinion on anything.
Good.
We're a dying breed, journalists that don't have an opinion. That's the way I was taught. That's the way my dad was taught before me. Between us, somebody named Kleinberg was in the newspaper business in Florida for 70 years. So I'm sorry to tell you that I'm not going to give you my opinion on Ron DeSantis, but I will talk about one thing, and I'm speaking as a historian, because when I was at the Palm Beach Post, I wrote a column on local history that ran for 20 years. And the last 3 years I was there before I retired, I wrote a column on state history that ran in 24 Gannett papers across Florida. And there are some people who don't like teaching history if it would make people feel upset or guilty or uncomfortable. To me, that's not a political thing. That's wrong. As a historian, that's the stuff you have to hear. You're gonna hear the sweet stuff, but you have to hear the bad stuff. When I was writing the Florida history column, a guy wrote to me and he said, "Why are all your columns about race? Why do you write about slavery in Florida? Why do you write about Jim Crow? Why do you write about lynching? Why do you write about segregation in Florida in the 60s? I said, "Sir, you ever heard of Willie Horton, the guy who wrote who robs the banks?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You know what?" They asked him why he robbed the banks. What did he say? "That's where the money is." So you want me to write about Florida's history and not mention race? You don't want me to mention that when the Spanish explorers came here, they basically stole the entire place from indigenous peoples that were already there. And within 200 years, all of those people had become extinct from European diseases. You don't want me to talk about that. You don't want me to talk about the fact that the Seminoles came down from Alabama and Creek and Georgia. They were cousins of the Creeks, and the Americans promptly started a war to run them out of Florida. And people say to me, "Oh, what about the Seminole casinos? How they're millionaires? They have all these casinos." I said, "Well, make a deal. We will murder your ancestors and steal all your land, and then we'll give you a casino." Anybody? No. So I shouldn't write about race in Florida. Well, in my lifetime, I can remember being 6 years old in 1962 and going to a Woolworths in Miami and seeing separate bathrooms for white people and black people. And thinking in my naivete, 6 years old, how thoughtful of them to make sure there's enough bathrooms to go around. I have a picture that you guys can find on the internet of a 12-year-old girl looking up with a big smile on her face at the legs of a black man who's being lynched from a tree. This did not happen in the Panhandle in 1880. It happened in Fort Lauderdale in 1936, not that long ago. And when I was a senior in high school, they were just then integrating schools in Florida. But you don't want me to write about that. You want me to write the Walt Disney version? I'm not going to do it. Anybody who's familiar with the March of the Living? This is where Jewish kids go to the concentration camps, and they march through the camps. And what they're doing is they're pretty much giving, they're pretty much giving them a middle finger, aren't they? They're giving them the finger. They're saying, "You guys failed. You tried like heck. It was a heck of a try. You tried really hard. You tried to wipe us out, but it failed." That's what they're doing when they march through those camps. You know who marches with them? The grandchildren of the commandants. Why? Because Germany teaches history that makes people feel uncomfortable. Now, those grandchildren should not have guilt for anything because it was their grandfather who did it, but their country teaches them to feel bad about it and says, "We were the most sophisticated and erudite nation in Europe, and we allowed ourselves to be taken over by a madman who murdered millions of people and burned down half of Europe. And we need to tell you about this so it doesn't happen again." And you know who's the only people in Germany that aren't offended by this? The neo-Nazis. So a guy said, raised his hand, he goes, "Well, we moved to America in the 30s, so we're not responsible for slavery and all the other terrible things America did." I said, "Do you boast about America's greatness?" "Well, of course." I said, "Well, you got to own the warts too." So I'm going to teach history, especially the part that should make you feel uncomfortable and make you feel bad. No, you didn't do it, but we did it. Our ancestors did it. And you need to know it so it doesn't repeat itself. And I don't have to tell you that there are many people alive today in the year 2023 almost who say that the Holocaust didn't happen, that Jim Crow was was not as bad as it sounded, that slavery wasn't that bad, right? So as long as there are people like that, I'm going to teach you history, especially the bad parts. So that was a long way about long roundabout way of saying, you can't have my opinion. Other questions or comments? Anything I left out about weird Florida or Florida in general? Yes, ma'am.
I grew up in Coral Gables,
That's where I was born.
really. We could have been neighbors. I gotta tell you, I don't think we're that much difference in age. I really kind of feel like we had different experiences.
You had different experiences because?
I certainly never experienced Woolworth's sort of thing with the separate bathrooms. My parents had a kind of a sort of a dry goods sort of store, I could say, in Coconut Grove in the Black neighborhood. I would go down there and I remember my job was selling the thread. But it was like, I never felt uncomfortable. It was very, and I knew there were differences. I knew there was the, the Black area. Maybe it was the way that my parents taught me. And I do remember when there was a comment that one of my schoolmates made on the way to school one time about, hanging all the Blacks and stuff, but it was like, that was the unusual thing. That was the exception to when I was growing up.
Here's what I'll say about that. Anywhere you grew up, you probably found that for the most part, you didn't hear the bad stuff, but it was there. And a lot of people, like my in-laws, grew up in Indiana, and they said, we look back on it now and we were so naive because everything looked fine and our maid liked working for us. And then later, years later, we finally realized the reason she worked for us is because she wasn't allowed to go to college and get an education and maybe be a doctor. And yeah, maybe you never saw the Woolworths with the segregated signs. And maybe everywhere you went, and when I was growing up, I had Black friends. I had friends from all religions, and our school in Miami luckily avoided any kind of problems, but it was there. And so, and by the way, it wasn't just there in the South. Anybody here from New England? 1976, the last busing riots to occur in America. Boston, Massachusetts, Cradle of Liberty. So anybody that thinks the South has a corner on prejudice and bigotry and intolerance, anybody want to go to the mat with me on that? No, I didn't think so. So the answer is yes. The problem is you can have 99 days where everything is great. But we must not accept the one day when it's not great. We need to strive for the day where 100 days out of 100 are great. And that's the way I have to look at it.
That's perfection.
What's that?
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, of course not. Of course not, but we can strive for it. So, any last questions or comments?
Well, again,
Nope, I'm getting, okay.
I know, but I kind of feel it's kind of like, I grew up in Coral Gables, like I said before. Jews were the minorities there. It's not like Miami Beach where everybody was. So that was kind of a different experience. And certainly I do know that obviously growing up in the 60s in Miami and we were right by Coconut Grove, so that may have been a different sort of feel. But it's just, prejudice was there. And I think everybody was more of you kind of knew it and you kind of stuck more towards your own if you could. But what I do remember as a kid, when they first started with the desegregation, was I was in elementary school and they started it in high school. And that's where they had the problems. And as a kid, I kept thinking to myself, well, why aren't you starting with the younger kids where we don't have our biases already? And
Hindsight is 2020.
no, I was as a kid at the time.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment. Florida is a sunny place.
Hold on.
Florida is a sunny place for shady people.
You know what? If I had a nickel for every shady person I wrote about, I'd be a millionaire. Half the stories I wrote about were shady people in Florida. Well, listen, come buy a book if you feel like it. Otherwise, thank you for listening.
Thank you.